Want to get this out of the way quickly, given it's a hot day in here in Massachusetts, and I need my AC on. So let's get this over. So what is Icarus in the Sky? Ace Combat Icarus in the Sky was a novel that was released alongside the collector's edition of Ace Combat Assault Horizon back in 2012, I believe? 2014? I don't quite know the release date. However, the main point of this is my personal thoughts on the book and just if I think it's worth a read if you're both an Ace Combat fan or a fan of or just a fan of aircraft in general, which, hey, if you're a fan of Ace Combat, of course you are. So, I'm going to preface this by saying this storyline is unfortunately not going to be continued. The book itself didn't sell well because it was sold in Japan, duh. And they're probably never going to make a continuation of it. They do take some aspects of this book's storyline and carry it over to Infinity, but that not only does it also lose a bunch of its aspects from this book, but Infinity storyline is also discontinued, so lose-lose situation there, so take that as you will. Now, with that in mind, if you're still interested in giving this a read despite what I just told you, then let me give you my personal thoughts. Because, in all honesty, I think this book's actually quite decent. First off, the book has a prologue, an epilogue, and 3 chapters. These 3 chapters vary in terms of length. The first one is easily the shortest. The second one takes a little... The second one is around the same length as the third, though just a little bit shorter. And the third is obviously the longest. Now, to begin with, its characters, it has multiple different main characters, although mainly there are 2 characters who are given the most focus, 3 if you count one of the main villains, and a bunch of other side characters. Now, all of these characters, except for one, are original characters, and I have to say, outside of two of the characters, which actually do have their development throughout this book, none of them are really fleshed out all that well. However, given that this is a 200-page novel, and it's only one novel that will never be continued, I can accept this. However, the 2 characters that we actually do have a little bit of development for, I actually like quite a bit. First off, the one thing that carries over from the Ace Combat games is Nagase. This is not the same Nagase that we know from Ace Combat 5. This is a new Nagase that is in this book, and it shows because she shares the same name, but not any of her personality traits. The Nagase in Ace Combat 5 that we knew was relatively uptight, but also rather... no way for me to say this easily. She was a peace lover, and she hated war. Some found this annoying, others didn't. I really didn't myself. However, I've actually come to enjoy the Nagase in this book over the one in Ace Combat 5. While the peace-loving thing from Ace Combat 5 didn't really bother me, this Nagase not only is a lot more fun, given that she actually has some pretty decent dialogue in this book, but she also has a little bit of growth in the fact that not only does she have an actual backstory that makes pretty good sense, but she also does change throughout this book in a pretty genuine way, especially in her relationship with Asano, which is the second character I will be talking about. Not going to spoil too much, but this Nagase I actually grew to like pretty quickly, pretty easily, and I started to like her more as this book went on. All in all, she's a pretty decent character for the little that we were able to be given. Then there's Asano. I was actually hesitant to say whether or not to say what I liked or didn't like about the character because I wasn't able to get my thoughts around him very well. However, as the book went on and I read it again, I found this character to actually be relatively intriguing. He's much more mysterious. There is a backstory that he's hiding of some kind, and we only get bits and pieces about what it was about and what it may have been. Regrettably, we won't get to see what this full backstory would be, but we can theorize what it is based on the details that the book's given us, and it is a pretty interesting one. And just like Nagase, he actually does change throughout the rest of the book. This book mainly prioritizes Asano and Nagase and just how those two interact with each other from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. It's very There isn't much of it, but it's very genuine, and I actually grew to like both of these characters by the end, and I really wish to see more of them. The other characters are not so well grown or developed because the book obviously prioritizes these two, but the other characters are likable in their own ways, but I never really came to care about them that much. But, that's to be expected of a 200-page novel, like I mentioned. There is one other character that is on the villains or bad guys side, or just antagonists in the book, however you say it. I'm not going to spoil who they are, but they have a couple of interesting traits about them, and I actually didn't find them to be as overwhelmingly evil as some other Ace Combat antagonists. Grabark, Taurus, stuff like that. Either way, characters are done decently well for the little that they were given. Then comes the plot, which this is where it either varies from being pretty decent to really boring. Now, to begin with, Nagase and Asano are both test pilots for the ASFX Shinden, which is one of the fictional aircraft in this universe. By the way, going to go on a quick note here and point out this. This book takes place in the Assault Horizon universe. It does not take place in Joint Assault, Infinity, or the mainline Ace Combat universe. Some may see this as an issue. I personally don't. I try to view every single storyline in Ace Combat with a clear mind, regardless of what they're doing, of what they're trying to do, and I only really have any personal distaste against it unless if the storyline is actually bad. However, this book actually does make the Assault Horizon universe genuinely much more interesting and much more intriguing. Learning more about the world building, which I actually find to be pretty decent in this book, learning more about that, how the characters came to be, how the aircraft were developed, and what this war is going on, genuinely puts some spice into the relatively bland and generic Assault Horizon universe. If you played Ace Combat Assault Horizon, then you already know where I'm going with here. But added spice aside, it does go a little bit too far in some of its world building to the point that the actual plot takes a bit of a back seat at points. Much of Chapter 2 is this, and it gets to the point where it's like, okay, get to the action. I know enough as it is. You can go into detail about this later. I don't need this right now. I want to get to the characters. I want to get to the action, stuff like that. The plot takes a bit of a backseat, and this can be exceptionally annoying. However, Chapter 3 is where the plot really starts to pick up, and this book actually does something that I was really starting to appreciate. This book doesn't just give you a viewpoint of the good guy's side. It gives you a point of the antagonist side as well. You get to see their interactions, how their life is, what their goals are. And from the little that you do get of them, because it doesn't go too in depth, although I do think it should have went given a little bit more time to their story. I actually found the characters to be nowhere near as annoying as I thought they were going to be, like I mentioned earlier. And I actually grew to be intrigued by these characters and think, what are they going to do next? What would they have done next? Then we get to the dogfights, which are actually done pretty decently well. It's very hard to tell what can be going on at times unless you read every single detail very clearly and don't forget any of them. So in that respect, some of the dogfights can be hard to read up on, especially since this is just a problem with the book as a whole. There are times where I have a lot of trouble trying to catch up on who is talking to who and who is speaking. There are times where there's 3 or more characters speaking, and you can't tell which one is which because the book doesn't tell you who was speaking. They give one line of dialogue in quotes, then another dialogue in quotes, and they keep going on until the conversation ends. And this can get exceptionally annoying. But with that in mind, do I think this book is worth a read if you're an Ace Combat fan, and you're willing to see what they were trying to do with the story despite the fact that you know that's not going to be completed? Honestly, yes. This book is a very short read. It's only about 200 pages long. And for the little that this book does give, there is actually some very interesting details that carry on into future Ace Combat games. They give a lot of details regarding the CFA-44 Nosferatu, which the antagonists use in this book, and the ASFX Shinden, which, despite the fact that this takes place in an alternate universe, these are some details that most definitely would be carried over to other games, and thus these details are very interesting to read about and trying to understand these aircraft. By the end of the book, the ASFX Shinden and the CFA-44 Nosferatu are actually my favorite fictional planes in the entire series, and that's thanks to this book. This book was a very interesting read at times. It was a very intriguing book in wanting to know what these characters were doing and just what was going on with this war. However, during Chapter 2, it does have its issues where it does drag on with the world building a little bit too much and just gets a bit slow and is a little bit boring. But given that it's a very quick read, and since this book was released only in Japan, like I mentioned earlier, they had to carry on with the translations, and they ended up releasing this book for free. I will put a link to where you can read this book for free online, and you'll be able to read it there with no real issues and no price to pay. Given that you're not losing anything by giving this book a try, I would highly recommend giving it a read if you just want to satisfy that little Ace Combat hinge. Hell, if I don't love an Ace Combat story that doesn't have a silent protagonist for once. But anyway, little quick review. I would recommend giving this book a try, and I'll talk to you guys later. See ya.